Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into, well, one of the biggest questions out there. What does it really mean to be enlightened?
Yes, it's a huge one.
And we're aiming to cut through some of the common ideas, maybe some misconceptions, thanks to a source shared by one of you listening, someone who asked this exact question.
That's great. Always good to ground these talks in real questions people have.
Definitely. So the source is a post from the NIV community for self-inquiry and sustainability. It's written by Anurag Jain.
Okay.
And it's framed very directly as a response to his friend Andy, who basically asked, what is enlightenment? What's it like? What's the end of the journey, really?
Got it. A direct question demanding a direct answer.
Exactly. So our mission here is to explore the specific answer given in this source. It comes from a traditional Advaita perspective, a non-dual philosophy.
Right. And that's key because this approach is quite different from paths focused purely on experience or achieving mystical states.
How's that?
Well, Advaita, as presented here, really leans on rational scrutiny, philosophical inquiry. It's less about chasing a feeling and more about gaining knowledge or insight.
Okay, knowledge over feeling. So let's start where the source starts with what enlightenment isn't.
Good place to begin. Because the source tackles a really common misconception head-on.
Which is?
That enlightenment is some kind of mystical high, a state of bliss, or a mind-blowing shift in consciousness. The author even mentions they chased this idea for years.
I think a lot of people imagine it that way. So the source just says, nope.
Pretty much. It states it very flatly. Enlightenment is not an experience, no matter how fantastic or blissful a particular experience is.
Okay, but why? Why can't it be an experience? What's the reasoning there?
The logic given is pretty straightforward. Every experience is passing and temporary, while truth has to be permanent.
Ah, okay. Experiences come and go.
Yeah.
Happiness, sadness, even bliss.
Exactly. So if enlightenment were just another experience, it would also be temporary. It would fade.
And if that specific blissful experience is truth, then what about all the other times? Are they false?
Precisely. The source points out that contradiction. You'd have truth only existing sometimes, alongside falsity, like light existing alongside darkness. It doesn't make sense if truth is meant to be constant, always present.
So the permanence of truth means it can't be tied to the impermanence of experience. That clicks, logically.
Right. And the author connects this to their own journey, spending 15 years reading texts, following teachers who emphasized experience, even figures like J. Krishnamurti.
But they found issues.
Yeah, they mentioned finding cracks, basically, unanswered questions, or getting answers that didn't really hold up, maybe being told not to ask questions about enlightenment itself.
You'll just know it when you get there kind of thing.
Exactly, that kind of dismissal. And that dissatisfaction, the source says, led the author towards Advaita.
Which, unlike those other paths, encourages questions.
Yes. Advaita uses philosophy, rational thought, as its main tool. It doesn't shy away from analyzing enlightenment. In fact, the source mentions mumukshutva, this intense desire for liberation and understanding is actually seen as a prerequisite. You need that burning desire to question everything.
Okay, so the questioning is central. Which brings us back to Andy's core question, the one that sparked this whole thing. Can you remind us what he asked?
Yeah, it's a powerful set of questions. Let me read it again. What does it really mean to know yourself? How does it feel to have no more questions about life, its meaning, its purpose, its glaring inequalities? What does it mean to reach not just a roadblock, not a fueling station, not a cul-de-sac, but the actual end of the journey? What does it really mean to be enlightened?
Wow, those are the big ones, aren't they? So if enlightenment isn't an experience, what is the answer from this Advaita perspective?
The source defines it as direct knowledge or insight into the nature of all experiences.
Knowledge or insight? Okay. Into the nature of all experiences. What nature is that? What's the core thing we need insight into?
It boils down to the most basic structure of experience, which the source identifies using this triad: Jiva, Jagat, and Isvara.
Jiva, Jagat, Isvara. Can you break those down?
Sure. Roughly, Jiva is the subject, the I, the individual self. Jagat is the object, the world, everything you perceive. And Isvara is the creator, God, the source, however you conceive of that.
So me, the world, and where it all came from. The fundamental questions. Who am I? What is this? Who made it?
Exactly. That's the perceived structure. And the source says that all dualistic paths that accept this basic separation, try to answer these questions by offering different accounts of creation.
Like scientific accounts versus religious ones.
Right. Science might point to physics, the Big Bang, theistic religions point to God, others might talk about impersonal energy or time or sound being the source. Each has its own creation story.
And these stories form the basis of their whole philosophy.
Yes, and their path to liberation.
Yeah.
Worship God, understand the laws of nature, merge with the energy source. It depends on their specific theory of creation.
But the source sees a problem with all of these paths, right?
A fundamental one, which is that each has its own theory of creation, which obviously contradicts the other schools.
They can't all be right about how things were created if the stories conflict.
Precisely. So you end up with different schools defending their theory, criticizing others. The source notes this can lead to, well, antagonism, not unity.
Right. You're defending your model of reality against theirs.
Yeah. But the crucial point here is that all these dualistic paths, despite their differences, accept the theory of creation. They start from the assumption that creation happened.
And by doing that, they accept the triad.
Exactly. They accept Jiva, Jagat, Isvara, the individual, the world, the source, as fundamentally real, separate things. Their goal is usually to overcome suffering by getting the Jiva back to Isvara, reaching the source.
Okay, this makes sense. This sets up the big shift.
Mm-hmm.
Because the source says Advaita, followed by only a handful of seekers, asks something completely different.
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting, like you said.
It doesn't just offer a new theory of creation.
No. It asks a much more radical question. Has creation ever happened?
Whoa, okay. Not how did it happen, but did it happen at all?
Exactly. It pushes the inquiry right back to the very beginning. Takes real courage, as the source points out.
So how does Advaita, according to this source, even approach such a massive question?
By rigorous examination, looking at all experiences in all three states, waking, dreams, and deep sleep. And very importantly, by applying intense logical scrutiny to the principle of cause and effect.
Cause and effect. Why is that so central?
Because the idea of creation inherently depends on cause and effect, right? A cause, Isvara, Big Bang, whatever, produces an effect, Jagat, the world.
Makes sense.
But the source states that Advaita's philosophical analysis negates them, cause and effect, by showing their inconsistencies.
It shows inconsistencies in the logic of cause and effect itself.
Yes. According to this perspective, one cannot hold the theory of cause and effect without involving oneself in some form of logical inconsistency or the other. The source doesn't detail the proofs here, but the conclusion is that the very concept, when examined deeply, falls apart logically.
Okay, so if cause and effect can't be logically justified,
then the idea of something being caused or created also can't be logically justified.
So no sound basis for creation itself.
Precisely. And the insight that arises from seeing this logical breakdown is described as a direct insight into the nature of reality as unborn.
Unborn. Because nothing can be truly born if cause and effect isn't a fundamentally valid principle.
That's the core takeaway presented here. This means creation has never actually happened.
Never happened. That just turns everything upside down.
It really does. And the source spells out the implications clearly. This further means that the triad of Jiva, Jagat, Isvara actually does not exist.
The self, the world, the creator, they don't exist.
Not as separate, independently real entities that were created. This means that there are no individual persons, no world, and no God or source in the way we usually think of them.
Okay, hang on. If creation never happened, if there's no separate me, no separate world, no separate source,
No.
then what? What is all this? What am I experiencing right now?
From this perspective, the answer is profound. All phenomena are Brahman. All appearances are Brahman.
Wait, say that again?
All phenomena are Brahman. All appearances are Brahman. It's not that the world is made of Brahman or rests on Brahman. The appearances themselves are Brahman. There's no separation.
So everything I see, feel, think, it is this Brahman, appearing as it does, but it was never actually born or created as something separate.
That's the insight described. It's not a creation from Brahman, it is Brahman.
Wow, okay. So if someone really gets this insight, what's the resulting state like? The source described it intriguingly.
It did. It said the state is somewhat similar to sleeping while awake.
Sleeping while awake, what does that feel like? Or mean?
The implication, as the source explains, is that there is no individual experiencer experiencing a world of objects.
Like in deep sleep, there's no me having an experience.
Kind of, but you're conscious. The sense of being a separate self, a subject looking out at a separate object world, dissolves. Even while the body is functioning, awake.
The duality collapses. The observer-observed split isn't there anymore. There's a quote the source uses from an Upanishad.
Yes, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It really captures this non-dual reality. Let me read that verse. For where there is duality, as it were, there one smells another, there one sees another, there one hears another, there one speaks to another, there one thinks of another, there one understands another, where verily everything has become the self, then by what and whom should one smell, then by what and who should one see, then by what and whom should one hear, then by what and to whom should one speak, then by what on whom should one think, then by what and whom should one understand. By what should one know that by which all this is known? By what, my dear, should one know the knower?
That's powerful. When everything is the self, who sees what? Who knows what? There's no other left. It asks, how can the knower be known by anything else?
Exactly. The whole structure of subject-verb-object breaks down, and the source explains that when this insight fully lands, all questions come to an end because there is no questioner left.
No I to ask the questions anymore.
Right. The sense of being a separate asker dissolves, and similarly, there is no doer left. There is no doing happening at any time.
No feeling of being an agent making things happen.
That sense vanishes too. And there is no experiencer left because there is no world of objects there to experience.
Because the world itself was never created as a separate thing to be experienced.
Exactly. So what are all these appearances then? The things we see and interact with?
Yeah, if they weren't created, what's going on?
The source calls them nothing but a magical display of appearances, which, even though appearing to be born and dying, are actually never born.
Appearances that seem to come and go, but were never truly born. Wow.
Yes. And to make this idea clearer, the source uses a classic metaphor from Gaudapada's Mandukya Karika,
Which is,
the blazing firebrand world in darkness.
okay, like swinging a lit torch or a stick in the dark.
Precisely. And when you do that, what do you see?
You see shapes, right? Circles of light, lines, maybe wiggly patterns.
Exactly. It appears to form these varied shapes, circles, lines, or serpent-like curves. But, and this is the crucial point the source emphasizes, no such shapes exist in reality.
They're illusions caused by the motion.
Right. The source calls them mere illusions, products of motion and perception. And it does note that these illusory shapes seem superimposed upon a single, unmoving point of fire. The illusion seems layered on the reality.
Okay, so the illusion depends on the motion, but the reality is just the single point of light.
Correct. And this metaphor is used to explain the world, just as those fleeting shapes don't exist apart from the actual firebrand.
The world of many things doesn't exist apart from...
Apart from consciousness. The source uses the terms Atman or Brahman here. The apparent world, with all its variety, isn't separate from that underlying consciousness.
So the world isn't a separate thing made by consciousness. It's more like the patterns the firebrand makes, an appearance of consciousness.
That's the idea. All the things we perceive, birth, change, multiplicity, are described as projections of the mind, born from ignorance and movement. Much like the firebrand shapes are born of motion, they aren't inherent realities.
And the self, consciousness itself.
Is like the firebrand's single point of light. Unmoved, singular, and unborn.
And when the firebrand stops moving.
The illusion collapses. You just see the single point of light.
So similarly, the source suggests when the mind's projections stop that movement born of ignorance.
Then non-dual awareness is revealed. The illusion of a separate world dissolves back into the reality of singular consciousness.
And the core point from that metaphor is?
That nothing is ever truly born, nor does anything change. There is no real transformation, only seeming, only appearance.
Only seeming, only appearance. And again, all phenomena are Brahman. All appearances are Brahman. They just are that reality, appearing diversely.
Yes. So for the wise person, the one with this insight, the source concludes the world is seen like the patterns traced by a whirling firebrand, unborn, insubstantial, and dependent solely on perception. The appearance is recognized as appearance, not mistaken for separate reality.
This is, well, it's a radically different way of understanding reality and enlightenment. So bringing it back to the listener, to you who shared this source or anyone exploring these ideas, what does this all mean?
I think the value proposition here, based on the source, isn't about chasing a feeling. It's about finding and understanding an insight that feels logically sound, that stands up to every form of rational scrutiny.
Especially through that intense examination of cause and effect.
Right. It contrasts the complexity and, frankly, the contradictions inherent in various dualistic creation stories.
With the stark simplicity of the Advaita position presented here, creation as we conceive it just never happened.
And the argument is that this specific understanding is what finally brings an end to those deep, fundamental questions Andy asked. Why?
because it dissolves the questioner.
Exactly. It dissolves the very structure, the separate self, the separate world, the separate source that gives rise to the questions in the first place. No separate doer, no separate experiencer, no separate questioner.
It's not about finding the final answer within the old framework, but realizing the framework itself was based on a misunderstanding of reality's nature.
That seems to be the core message.
So, Bimmy, a final thought for you, the listener, to reflect on, drawn from this deep dive.
Well, building on the source's central argument that cause and effect can't be logically proven, that creation never happened, and therefore all appearances just are Brahman, never truly born. Maybe consider this. What does it fundamentally mean for anything to exist? If the world you see, the you feel yourself to be, are appearances, unborn, and not separate from consciousness, what truly is the nature of this reality you're experiencing right here, right now?
That's definitely something to chew on. A huge thank you again to the listener who shared this Neve community source and sparked this whole discussion. It's fascinating stuff.
Absolutely.
If you want to read the original post, look for the Neve community for self-inquiry and sustainability. And as always, thank you for joining us. We really enjoy digging into the materials you share. So if you come across articles, research, anything you think would make for a good deep dive, please send it our way. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring.